Would you pray with me a moment? Open my lips that my mouth might show forth your praise. And may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight. O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. One of the things that makes human beings different from all the other sentient creatures is we reflect on our experience. We try to understand what our experience means. We try to understand where it's going. We try to think how we could be doing it better. And we explain it, and we argue with each other about it. And from the furthest, deepest memory of human experience, we have been doing this reflecting. And we call the people who do this philosophers, lovers of wisdom, or theologians, people who find words to speak about God. Now, of course, I'm just inferring that this philosophy and theology goes all the way back to the beginning of the human experience. We don't actually have records all the way back, but I can tell you this. A few summers ago, Marie-Laure took me to see the Neolithic cave paintings in France. Paintings that go back 35,000 years. And to see them, you have to climb way down underground into this place of darkness that's totally complete. And as you're climbing along, you can feel the millions of tons of earth and rock above your head. And you feel the dripping of the water, which is not coming down as rain, but is literally circulating inside the living earth. And you come to a lighted chamber. And there, on the walls, are painted handprints and animals running and occasional abstracts. Now, I myself obviously have not lived the human experience those Neolithic philosophers and theologians lived, but the moment I saw it, I absolutely recognized that they were explaining through their art what their life was all about and the role of the holy in it, their God. That I was in their temple, not way above ground, but far below life above. And on the walls, they had painted on the stone, just like carved on the stone, their wisdom, their words for God. And this painting and writing down and carving is the thing about philosophers and theologians. They're all just human beings like the rest of us. They look around themselves at the human experience and they think about what it is. And they come up with explanations and solutions. But because they are humans, their explanations and solutions are always limited. Limited by the range of their minds, and their minds are limited by the range of their vision and imagination, and their imagination is limited by the range of their experience. Now, for normal mortals like us, they seem wise and brilliant. But in reality, they are just reflecting a predisposition to the world from which it emerges. They're saying back to the world that which already is. Now, you may not think about this very much, but I do, and I've come to believe that all of us have our philosophers and theologians. We may not know their names. We may just have absorbed their thoughts and their God words. The things that resonate with us, we're drawn to. And yet, those thoughts just confirm us in our predispositions, and still we say, aha, this is truth, this is fact, this is reality. But then we come to church, or we go to the synagogue, and we meet these other people, and they're called prophets. The word in Hebrew is navi, which means a spokesperson or an announcer. And these people are chosen by God to share God's truth, God's reality, God's facts. And while we do revere them by putting what they announce in the Bible, the truth is that most of us hate their guts, because the words they speak are always disturbing to how we want our lives to be. They poke holes in what we think is the truth. They pull out the foundation from what we think is reality. And they proclaim our facts to be half-truths or even lies. The prophets are always disruptive and corrosive and undermining of what we want to be, the truth, the facts, the reality. And we human beings hate that. We hate being put off balance and being told that we're doing it all wrong. But my friends, the truth and the facts and the reality that the prophets speak, if you really listen to them, is of a world that we have never seen or lived in. And that is why we know it comes from God, because it is not yet. And because it's so disruptive, that is why prophets invariably end up getting imprisoned, defamed, or killed. Because most of us, most of the time, do not like to feel like we're being held up to that kind of a bright light. We prefer to stand in a light that catches us in the best light. Now, Martin Luther King was such a prophet. He took all those books of prophecy from the Bible, the prophets of Israel, the words of Jesus of Nazareth, and he shined that light on modern America. And people hated him. You know, it's 50 years on now, and everyone loves Martin Luther King. But he was beaten and imprisoned and bombed out of his house and stabbed and ultimately assassinated. And my friends, the truth is, I never felt closer to Martin Luther King than when I came to the Dover Church, because I learned that in the history of the Dover Church, there was a pastor named Dean Clark, who was here from 1964 to 1985, who marched with Martin Luther King on civil rights and stood up with Martin Luther King about Vietnam. And while everyone loves Dean Clark now, I know that there were 3 votes taken to remove him from the ministry, all of which he wasn't removed from. But right here in this place, people did not like to hear that prophecy. Now, 50 years later, in 2021, King's prophecies are more pertinent, more relevant, more urgent than ever. Particularly the 4 he came back to over and over and over again in his preaching, in his work, in his marches. The obvious one, racial injustice and discrimination in our country. The second, poverty, irregardless of the color of your skin, the disparity between the rich and the poor in this wealthiest country of our world. The third, American military imperialism. He was talking, of course, of Vietnam, but it goes on. And the fourth, complicity, or at least moral weakness on the part of the American liberal church in the face of racial injustice and poverty and militarism. And I think, well, maybe we don't all agree, but I think these 4 problems are even worse now than they were in King's time. But a sermon is not a time to go over facts or interpretations of political points of view. The sermon is a time to go to the doctors. When I was a young man, I never gave going to the doctors a second thought. When I was young, my height and weight were always going up, and that was good. And I never had any problems. But now in my 57th year, I'm of an age when I go to the doctors with a lot of thoughts. First of all, I wonder if anything's going to be going wrong. You know, the truth is that my height's going down and my weight's still going up. But I wonder, is the doctor going to say, you need to see the cardiologist? Or do you need to see the audiologist? Or do you need to see the urologist? Or, of course, the dreaded oncologist? Now, we all know people who prefer not to know the truth, and they don't go to the doctors. They just take life as it comes. And we all know other people who do go and hear the prognosis and the treatment plan, but still choose to do their own thing. And then there are those of us who go and hear the prognosis and get the treatment plan and choose to dive in. But when it comes to our communal life, our life together as a church, or our life together as a town, or our life together as a commonwealth or as a nation, we prefer not to go to the doctor. We prefer to listen to our philosophers, even though we ought to know that they're only telling us what we already want to hear. We know. We either watch CNN or Fox News. We either read the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times. We believe one more than the other. But my friends, the question for faithful people like us is, do we honestly prefer to stake our lives on political and economic philosophies that only perpetuate the world as we know it? Or are we going to go to the prophets and trust in God and work towards a world that has never yet been, but that only exists in the mind of God and comes to us through the mouths of prophets? It's amazing how we've romanticized Martin Luther King Jr. He's sort of a black Santa Claus now. But you know, he would invite us to actually dive into what he really said and to read what he really wrote and to try working on the things that he really worked for and see what that's like and what they tell us about the state of our souls. Every prophet, including Jesus, tells us that the treatment plan is going to be painful. It's going to be just like going on a massive diet or undergoing chemotherapy or learning how to walk again after having your legs crushed in an accident. But that's how we honor prophets like Martin Luther King. By looking at the world in the light that they shined and allowing their vision to change how we see our lives and the world and where we should be going. Amen.